Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our Q&A with Brenda. We hope you enjoyed the show, and it's really wonderful to be able to switch over live and actually spend some time with you, asking questions and getting to know more about the behind the scenes of Brenda in working this fabulous novel. So
Don't
Brenda,
mute yourself.
Thank you
You're
for
fine. Leave that on.
That was really wonderful.
No, it was not.
Okay, I thought that I would just start out with a question and then pass it over to everybody else because I know they're eager to talk with you.
It's only you here.
Brenda, so I was, you mentioned that your family has a long history in the military with records stretching back to the Civil War. So just a very open, larger question, what drew you? Because it seems like you could have so many sources, personal, historical, to write from. What drew you to the Cuban Missile Crisis in particular?
Thank you, Zavinia, for that question. Before I answer it, I just want to thank everybody for being here. It's such a terrific group. I'm looking at everybody's face, and there's the people from the FAS Donor Relations and the San Francisco family and the Connecticut family and the Arlington family is here, and the Jamaica family and the Harvard family and the Pullman family. So thank you all very much for being here. So Zavinia, the thing that I didn't think I was going to be writing military-based stories when I first started, but I realized that that is part of my story, even though my father retired from the Army when I was just 5. We really grew up on base in everything but where our house was. And so I had a lot of that military dependent in me. And when I was thinking about the aftermath of 9/11 and thinking about what individual people could do to help us through that kind of new global crisis, I wanted to go back to a time where we knew everything turned out okay. And that's how I lit upon the Cuban Missile Crisis. And as I started thinking about whether to set it there, there was so much going on at the same time that I wanted to really kind of build the world the way it was, because the way we think of the crisis kind of collectively is what was going on in the White House and what was going on in the Kremlin. But there was so much going on, and everything that happens, even the, what's happening in Israel right now, everything happens because individuals participate. So I wanted to look at it on the everyday individual level. And because I have an aversion to violence, to write military stories, I think I gravitate to the non-combat pieces that surround the military. And so you get this dependent life here, military dependent life.
Can you hear me at all?
Yes, Lee.
Okay, so, and I'm Lee, and I also am loving Q&As and wanting to probe deeper into the novel and hoping that many of you will speak up. Do we have it set up so that people can also raise their hands? I think in addition to chat. Can you hear me all right, Sabinia? Okay, so I have a question for Brenda, because I'm so interested in the relevance today of your book, with all that's going on in our world and the eruptions of war and war and its consequences, that your book has somehow and I wonder if you have thought about that at all.
you know, I have, and I think it goes back to what I was talking about, like who are we, in these global crisis times, and what makes for the success of getting through them. The pandemic, we saw very different outcomes in different countries depending upon how the policies were, and even in different states, right? How policies were, how people followed the policy or didn't follow the policy. So I'm very interested in that, and in how, like, what has changed since 1962, or what has stayed the same? You know, in 1962, we really still trusted our government.
Mhm.
Not everybody, but on the whole, we trusted our government. And now, especially after the last 4 years, no one trusts anything in government, hardly, you know. And it makes it so much more difficult. How many lives would have been saved if more people had trusted the government during the pandemic? So, so that's yes. I'm interested in that, in that sense, but also in the sense of who we think um, belongs to us, and who are the other. Who's the other? You know, who's the immigrant? Who's the non-military person? Who's the, you know, person outside of the family? Who's, you know, is your husband part of your family when it really comes down to it? Those are some of the questions that come up in the
Yeah,
book.
that does come up in the book, which of course I read several times. There's one question in chat. It says, there's a novel about, for the most part, the women. Can you speak more about bringing their stories to the forefront?
Yes. So I really wanted to think about how we are, how we look at people of color, and how we can change the way we can look at people of color through our culture, right? And so one of the things I wanted to do was write a book about women of color who had agency in their own lives and were not victims. You know, they live with racism, they live with limitations, but they don't see themselves as victims of it. And so I was very interested in developing those kinds of characters, even though they're also, you know, having affairs, and one is too scared to at first speak up because she has depression, and you know, so I, I I wanted to be able to add those kinds of people into our cultural memory,
Yeah,
by writing historical fiction about them.
right. Svinia, did you want to pick up a couple questions from chat, or?
I'm looking at chat. I don't, I'm not seeing it. Just a second.
Does anyone have a live question? I
Yeah.
noticed Lou Jones is there. Lou, knowing you, you've got to have a live question. Is your sound on? Oh, ask to unmute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I am especially intrigued by and listening, because I didn't know what to expect from your reading, and understanding that it's coming from a woman's standpoint, and also a woman of color, the standpoint being in the military. My father was military, but I was not. And there was a tremendous conflict in my house about that very issue. The fact that I was quickly becoming a peacenik, and he had served in World War II. So does your book deal with the issue of not just Black women, but the necessity of Black people to use the military as a way of advancing their station in life, which is something that was very important in our household.
Yes, yes, and it was important in ours too. My father couldn't afford to go to college,
Right.
right? There was one scholarship in his high school, and it went to someone else, right? And rumor has it that her mother slept with the principal, but you didn't hear that from me. But anyway, so he went into the Army because that was the way for him to get out. And in fact, I'm the only one in my family of origin that did not go into the Army. My parents met when my mother was an Army nurse. And my brother was in the Air Force. My late brother was in the Air Force. So I absolutely am very aware of that. And Ray, that you met in the reading, we do see some of his background. And he originally wanted to be an architect. And he's told, you know, Black boys don't do that. You know, you can maybe be a draftsman, but you can't be an architect.
My father got the same. Isn't that interesting? My father got the same, and he became a draftsman in the Army.
There you go.
Interesting.
Yes.
He was told he couldn't be an architect. Isn't that?
Yeah. So you see that in the book. And then he, you know, and then he goes on to find his way into the Army.
Now, just to follow up, and I don't want to take up, but has that legacy from your father through the military and your family gone beyond them?
In what sense?
Have their kids been absorbed into the military?
Right. So my brother, who I don't know whether he was the best candidate for the Air Force, was in the Air Force for 2 years. And many of my cousins were career military. So yes. And one of the things I found out, I visited an uncle that I didn't know my father's family well, but I visited an uncle who took me back to where they grew up in Illinois. And it was there that I saw that my great-grandfather had been in a colored regiment in the Civil War. And he was on, you know, the monument. So yes, yeah. So that's how I'm saying it goes all the way back.
That's right. That's right. Interesting.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know Lou, he's one of our photography editors, and his photography is amazing. And he's been on the cover of many of our issues. So here's to Lou. So would anyone else have a question?
There's a question from Julie. Julie's got her hand up first. So
right. And I just wanted to say to Julie that the idea of making him wanting to be an architect came from when I was working at the Grad School of Design and how few people of color were there. So Julie.
Yes, I figured that, and it's really a difficulty. For those of you who don't know me, we met Brenda when she was working at the Graduate School of Design. My husband's an architect, and we actively try to have a diverse pool in our practice. And to get color, we often have to have international students because there aren't many architects of color in this old country of ours, at least not that are willing to be up in Vermont. But I was wondering how much of the day-to-day, either the dialogue or situations or whatever, are based on your experience growing up on bases.
I think a lot of because I only was on base until I was 5. I didn't have the kind of stereotypical Army brat experience, but because all of my parents' friends were Army, and we went to the PX and the commissary, so a lot of the women that you see around Betty Ann and Lucy are not, they're not exactly based on the women who were my mother's friends, but they have the traits of those women. And some of them have their names. So you have the Gladys and the other Gladys. That I grew up with that, you know. So those little things are from my childhood. And having to say, Master Sergeant Sparks's residence, Brenda speaking. That was from, you know, which was very hard for me to say, and it took me a while to be able to answer the phone. So yes, I didn't realize how much I had absorbed until I started writing things and wanting to pull details into it. But thank you for that question. And Kelly, yeah. Kelly, all named Devin.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so wonderful to hear your work and your voice. This is a phenomenal event, and to hear the other artists has been fantastic. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to ask you a question about your book. And I'm watching the chat and realizing other folks have variations of my same question. Folks who've read your book will know this is a rich tapestry of different perspectives. You talked about Ray as being a pattern man who's got a certain rhythm to the way he talks. There's a rhythm to your book in the way that the different threads fold together. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you thought about the multiple perspectives, the different points of view in your book, and how you brought them together. And also how you collected such rich details and characterizations across such a wide variety of experience, not only the Black lived experience in DC, but also in Cuba. You have such a rich sense of who folks are and how they speak and how they express themselves and how that all folds together. I would love to hear your reflections on how all those details and those different elements came together in the rhythm and the pattern that they did.
Thank you. Well, that's a big question. Let me look at the time. So thank you, Kelly. So when I first started, I started with that notion of, you know, how do individuals react, right? And I actually started doing some drafting, and I was at a writing retreat, a blank page writing retreat, and I read some of what I had written, and somebody in the room mistook it for the Cuban point of view. And I thought, of course, Cuban women should be part of a conversation about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then I started asking who else should be part of that conversation. And that's how the various elements came together. I thought, who would benefit from the worst thing that we can think of? Who would benefit from a nuclear, actual dropping of a nuclear bomb? Well, someone who couldn't be themselves in their normal life, right? And so that's where the transgendered character came out of, you know? So a lot of it was really asking the question and seeing who walked in the door to answer it, right? And it was very important to me. And this, you know, I never do things that are easy. Right? Kelly knows, we work together, so she knows, right? But it was very important to me to think about all of the sets of women as the same souls who are then clothed in different cultural circumstances. And understand, and so that would be a way to explore nature versus nurture kind of thing, right? Like if you all have the same impulse, you all want to save your children from a dangerous situation, what does your cultural setting mean to how you can actually do that? Because I think that's one of the really important things for us to think about in a conflict like Hamas and Israel, you know, because they're the two sides of the same coin. But, you know, that's not how it plays out right now, you know. So I had to do a lot of research. I had to draw on a lot of imagination because I didn't have a lot of resources to go all these different places at the time. I was working, I had some illnesses, you know, and so I had to draw on many different ways of knowing about places and people, and really think about what are the telling details that can capture, you know, someone. You know, so a lot of times I get asked, what do you want people to be thinking? And I really love for people to think that they've met someone real, you know, and that they maybe, you know, they rode on a train with them and they heard this story about them and then, you know, they go off. But I want you to feel that depth, and that's what's most important to me. I'm not a journalistic writer. I'm more of a intuitional writer in that sense.
And I think that's why I had said the book crosses boundaries and it goes so in depth and crosses all kinds of boundaries. And it's so complicated that we could read it over again. Sabina, I didn't know if you wanted to ask any question or if you wanted
I asked a
add.
question initially, and I just, you know, I'm fine with staying for a couple more questions. Brenda, you good with that? I did see that in the chat, Kathy, I believe it was. I'm not seeing the name on the question. I thought it was yours, but anyway, somebody said, Brenda, I'm interested in the Cuban perspective here. I love the chorus scene. What research or gathering of background did you have to do to offer us that point of view?
I love the which scene?
The Cora, C-O-R-A scene, I think.
I'm sorry.
Whose question?
That was my question.
Oh, Richard.
Oh,
Okay.
Richard.
Brenda,
Yes.
tell me the name of that character in the middle scene that you read.
Oh, Lola.
Lola, I thought I heard. Okay, so that's the scene I'm talking about.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Thanks.
So the Cuban sisters were in some ways the most fun to write because to me, what was the most important things about them were their family and their sister bonds. And so I really drew on a lot of the people I know. Again, none of them are based on any particular person, but Mary Archambault, you might see elements of Kate in one in one of the sisters, in the best way, right? But I did as much research as I could about details, but I also realized that a lot of what I use to kind of represent different people are their rhythms and the way they speak. And even though I don't speak Spanish well, I do speak Spanish. I did study it, and I grew up in a majority Latino city. So I was kind of enmeshed in a lot of the culture. And then I did have to do the research of not just say, oh, this is Latino, but my Spanish teacher in college, Senora Ingrao, because she would say, in Argentina, we say, don't give a rabbit for a cat. In Brazil, they would say, and she'd give another phrase. And so one of the things I did was say, okay, what's an idiom that is used in Cuba that might not be used someplace else? And so those were the kinds of things that I was able to do research on.
And you're going to be reading with a Cuban writer shortly too, right? Would you
Yes.
mention who that is?
Yes. So Daryl Suarez, who is a Grub Street director, faculty director, has a book that is coming out next month. And we've met thanks to Devin, and we are going to be doing a conversation for Solstice magazine. And I'm really looking forward to exploring some of the things that we talked about here. Yes, Lee?
Well, no, go ahead.
And also we are hoping to put together a book reading. And so his book is, of course, is from a totally different perspective, but it looks at how culture and music comes into the Cuban identity and the Cuban exile identity. So.
And we have also published Dariel, and so Savinia, how are we doing now?
I think we are ready to call it a night, Brenda, unless
Yeah.
there's something else. Okay. And so
Could I just say one thing, that
Absolutely.
even though this isn't a fundraiser, if you'd care to subscribe for free to our magazine and get into our database so we can keep you in our community, or of course, if you'd care to donate a bit, that would be lovely. And now I'm going to give you to Savinia, who founded this whole thing and to whom I'm deeply grateful. So I'm out.
Well, I'm deeply grateful to everybody for attending, and very much Brenda for sharing this, the journey of your debut, marvelous debut novel with Solstice, and for taking the time to sharing some of the inspirations and backstories behind the big story. I'm sure we could continue this conversation until around midnight, but thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. And keep your eyes and ears open for in the fall. Hopefully we will not have a virtual event. We will have a live event,
Right.
another Riffs. So hope to see you at that book party fundraiser event. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brenda and Savinia.
Thank you.